Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I thought this evening I would talk a bit about what the Buddha taught in relation to sleeping and dreaming. There isn't a great deal of material on that topic, but there are some scattered references. The first point to make is the emphasis for practice on not oversleeping. In the Vinaya, it said that two thieves of a bhikkhu's time are idle conversation and sleep. And it's very detrimental to one's practice to sleep more than is necessary for well-being. Of course, you can't fix that in terms of number of hours. That's not possible because individuals differ and individual situations differ. If you have a very stressful situation and you're overtaxing your brain and nervous system during the day, then you'll need more sleep than if you have a relaxed situation. And it's certainly true that if one is doing enough meditation during the day, the sleeping hours can be cut considerably. In the Burmese Vipassana tradition, the recommended hours of sleep are four hours of sleep a night. But that's assuming that one is doing meditation for most of the rest of the day. There is a commentarial tradition that talks about the Buddha's sleep habits, that he would lie down for one watch of the night, which would be roughly 4 hours, 3 watches of the day and 3 watches of the night. So he would lie down in the middle watch of the night, but he wouldn't spend that entire time in sleep. He would spend part of it radiating metta, then he would sleep for a time, then he would project his consciousness into the universe and to other realms, looking for beings that needed assistance. So this is the case of a fully enlightened Buddha, that he would still require some minimal amount of sleep. And it also points out the fact that, or the practice that there's a difference between resting the body and sleeping. The physical body may need more rest than the mind. And you can have a rest lying down without going unconscious, without going into sleep. That's possible. The Buddha also spoke about some of the benefits of doing metta meditation. And one of the benefits of metta relates to this topic. He said that one who practices metta, is established in metta, sleeps easily, wakes easily, and dreams no evil dreams. You know? So doing metta meditation, loving kindness, or the same would apply for karuna or mudita, that this purifies the heart base and dispels any darkness. So there's no nightmares coming up from the depths. The inner being is purified and enlightened, and there's no darkness for nightmares to form. So one sleeps easily, wakes easily, and dreams no evil dreams. The Buddha said a couple of things about dreams. One is a passage speaking about the origins of dreams, and he says that these are various. Some dreams are visions of the past, which could be just regurgitated memories of this life, but also I think it's more pertinently referring to images or visions of past lives. And I think that is probably more common than we credit, that we have snatches and glimpses of past life, more or less jumbled or confused with elements from this life. Sometimes we might have very clear visions of past experiences in dreams. Some dreams are visions of the future, that there can be a resonance with times yet to come. Some dreams can be messages sent by the devas, because when one is in a dream state, the consciousness is open to influences from the other realms. Well, it's not stated here, but this may be also a source of nightmares if one has a bad base of morality. The sila is not good. There's an opening to the lower realms to interfere in the mind during dreaming. But the last category is some dreams are just wind in the belly. And I think that's very important, that we don't make too much of a big deal about every dream. They don't necessarily have a great meaning. There are some dreams that are significant, kind of major trumps, dreams that have a different feel. They have a different significance, and we know this is important. This is our higher self trying to tell us something, and we're in touch with some other level of consciousness. But the great majority of dreams are just scrambled bits of nonsense from memory and imagination, dismissed by the Buddha as just wind in the belly. The Buddha himself, before he became enlightened, when he was still a seeker, a bodhisattva, he had 5 prophetic dreams that he recorded, spoke to his disciples about later, and it comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, the 5 prophetic dreams of the bodhisattva. In the first dream, he dreamt that he was lying stretched across the whole earth meaning Jambudipa, meaning India, the known world. His head was resting on the Himalaya mountains and his feet were dipping in the southern sea, and his arms embraced the whole continent. And this he interpreted as prophesying that his teaching would spread over the whole of Jambudipa. In the second dream, he dreamt that a clump of grass sprung from his navel and grew until it touched the sky. And he interpreted this as saying the path he taught would inform or illuminate both humans and devas. The sky being symbolic of the deva realms. The third dream, he dreamt that white worms with black heads crawled out of the earth and swarmed up his legs to the knees. And he interpreted this as saying that he would have many white-robed lay followers. In the fourth dream, he saw birds of different colors coming from the east, west, north, and south. And they settled down by his feet and they all turned white. And he saw this as a prediction that he would have followers from all four castes, represented here by the four directions. And they would all flock to him and take ordination, become bhikkhus, and lose their caste status and merge into the Sangha. And in the last dream, it said that he climbed a great mountain of dung to the summit, but he was not soiled in the least. And he interpreted this as saying that he would be supplied with ample resources in the way of the four requisites of food, medicine, lodgings, and clothing, but he would not be corrupted or soiled thereby. So this is the only passage in the canon where the Buddha spoke at all about his own dreams. And I think it's probably a good question of whether after he became the Buddha, became enlightened, whether he actually dreamed or not. There may be a argument to be made that he was beyond dreaming because his being was so illuminated and purified that there was no unconscious anymore. The whole psyche was conscious. But we don't know. It's not stated one way or the other. Ajahn Mun, in the beginning of his autobiography, he recounts a significant dream he had where he saw himself in the forest walking along a rotten log, and at the end of the log was a Tipitaka case. That is a glass case with the Buddhist scriptures in it, as you see in monasteries in the East. And the case was locked. He couldn't get into it. And he interpreted this dream as, first of all, the rotten log. There's a pun in Thai for rotten log. It sounds like last birth. So he interpreted that he was walking his last birth. He would not come into being anymore. He'd become an arahant. And the locked Tipitaka case meant that he would never be a great scholar or master of the scriptures. So these are all examples of dreams that are of significance. And probably many of you have had some dreams in your life years ago that you remember. They have a different texture or feel. Something profound is being told to you by some other aspect of your being. Something that you don't work out in the conscious mind, in the waking mind. The process of dreaming itself, considered as a process, it's the faculty of sanya. And comparing dreaming to waking consciousness can tell us something about sanya, which is perception. And for understanding our own being and our nature and how we exist and how we understand and relate to the world, having some understanding of sanya or perception is an important key. Sanya works in close relation to another aggregate, the aggregate of vijnana or consciousness. And vijnana operates through the physical senses. We're speaking in the case of the waking mind. Sanya or vijnana works through the senses. So, for example, you see an object. There's a complex process sets into place whenever you see an object. You see an apple sitting on the table. Then first of all, there's a purely physical phenomena, which in our modern terminology we would describe as light waves striking the apple, then being reflected to the eye. And the color red is that part of the spectrum that's not absorbed by the apple. So that part of the spectrum strikes the eye. And that sets off a physiological process in the eye and the firing of the rods and cones and then the optic nerve. And that's the physical sense. But at the end of the chain of the physical process is vijnana, which is a purely mental phenomena that experiences or knows that redness and the roundness. Vijnana only knows color and shape. And this presence of vijnana is the difference between when a sentient human being observes the apple and when a camera, even a camera connected to a computer with an algorithm that can identify different kinds of fruit. We can imagine such a thing could be done. There's still no vijnana present. There's still no experience. There's no knowing. But what occurs in the human being is there's a qualia, to use a modern psychological term. There's a qualia. There's an experience that can only be known to the individual. But this still is just color and shape. Vijnana doesn't see the apple. That's the role of perception. Perception takes the raw information that's fed from vijnana, which gets it from the physical senses. So it goes from the physical senses to vijnana, which is the first raw immediate experience, and then it goes to perception, which is a level of processing that recognizes, this is an apple. So you see red and you perceive an apple. And perception has a flexible quality, and it's educable, for one thing, in that it can become more refined. Someone can just perceive an apple. Someone else can perceive a Red Delicious or a Macintosh, someone who knows the breeds of apple. But beyond that, perception essentially creates the apple that we actually experience, as distinguished from whatever exists out there on the table, which we never actually know. What we experience is our mental creation, a simulacrum or an image of the apple that occurs in our mind. And this is limited by a number of factors. It's limited by the acuity of the senses. We know that some animals can only see in black and white. Some humans even have color blindness or deficiencies in color perception. And some insects can see more colors than we can see. Insects like bees can perceive 2 or 3 colors beyond the violet in the higher frequencies that to us just appear as nothing, just black. They can perceive additional colors. So that there's the physical apparatus is the first limitation. Then there's the mind itself can perceive more or less accurately. Normally, when we're in a normal state of mind and we're healthy, mentally healthy, we perceive in such a way that it's a reasonably accurate simulation of the external world, and we can function in it. But even for a healthy, sane person, perception can be fooled. and we can perceive things that aren't there, or we can perceive things wrongly. And this particularly happens when the physical inputs are diminished. For example, in half light, like at twilight. And the classic example that's given in the ancient texts is mistaking a piece of rope for a snake. You're walking in the twilight and there's a piece of rope on the path, and you perceive a snake and you become alarmed. And you may have experienced something, maybe not exactly that, but one thing that a number of people in this kind of country experience is walking in the twilight and there's a stump or a rock that they perceive as a bear. And for the first instant when you have one of these mistaken perceptions, it can be quite realistic. That perception actually fills in the blanks and creates an image for you. And there are all kinds of optical illusions that demonstrate this. That you can, they have these optical illusions where there's a grid pattern and parts of it are missing. And unless you stare right at the missing part, you'll perceive the whole thing as complete, because it's just perception filling in the blanks. Another example I like to cite, one that's very common, is the way the mind can create very complex images from random shapes, like the clouds. Probably everybody has done this at some point in their life, just being in a relaxed state of mind and lying on your back looking at the clouds in the sky and seeing all kinds of faces and animals and shapes in the clouds. And that's just perception. At that time, you're not making an effort to perceive realistically, so the perception has some freedom and just goes for it. These can be quite elaborate images. So perception is kind of fluid as well. And dreaming, when one is asleep, the process is similar, except that the input from the physical senses is not present, or is very greatly diminished. You probably have experienced something from the outside world, particularly a sound, can infiltrate into a dream and take on a new meaning inside the dream. But generally, the dream is separated from the senses altogether, and the perception is free to roam. And it's just working with bits of imagination and memory and just kind of making stuff up. But it's still, the process of perception is the same in both cases, in waking and sleeping. So there's a sense in which we dream the universe. We dream the actual world. But that dreaming is constrained or limited by signals from the outside. And I've thought that in the Dewa realms, it's probably somewhere in between waking and dreaming, which would be why they have experiences so many what we would call magical occurrences and events, and things are very wonderful, because there's still some constraint from the outside world, but it's much less. It's more than in dreaming and less than in waking. And when we sleep, there's dream state, and there's also deep sleep. And these are neurologically distinguishable. They're quite different. And for a healthy experience of sleep, we require both. And even if we don't remember our dreams, some people say they never dream, but it just means they don't remember their dreams. Their mind still wanders. And this can be demonstrated medically with the neurological states that occur and the rapid eye movement. Neurologically, they call dream states rapid eye movement, because when the person's dreaming, their eyes are actually moving around. And when they're in deep sleep, their eyes are not moving. And deep sleep in the Buddhist Abhidhamma is described as a subsistence of consciousness into the bhavanga. And the bhavanga is the most rudimentary or basic level of consciousness. I've called it consciousness idling in neutral. It's different than being dead. You still have a stream of consciousness, but it's not taking objects, it's not moving around, it's just resting in that state. And in the waking state, we subside into bhavanga in between objects, taking an object. So when the mind is dull, when you're tired or you're dull, you're not very alert, then you're spending more time in bhavanga and only occasionally surfacing to take an object. So one of the ways of describing disciplined vipassana meditation is to minimize the time spent in bhavanga, to be continually taking objects. But at night, when one subsides into deep sleep, then it's just a continuous stream of bhavanga. And this is quite different from true unconsciousness. There's a realm of being that's called the asanya beings, the unconscious beings. And the origin of these was that there's some type of meditation that was condemned by the Buddha that some of the ascetics in India would do, where they suppressed their consciousness and perception. And the Buddha said this was a useless practice. And if one mastered that practice, then they would be reborn into this asanya realm, where they would sit for aeons of time without a single thought or perception. And hundreds of kalpas might pass. Then the first time a thought arose to their mind, they would subside from that existence and be reborn elsewhere. So one of the Buddha's disciples who had been in that state, and he remembered only the first and last moments because the rest he was unconscious, he said 500 kalpas passed in an instant. And this is quite different from deep sleep. A close parallel to that, I think, which many people will have experienced, that highlights the difference between that true unconsciousness and sleep, is complete anesthetic. Like if you go in for a medical procedure and you're put under complete anesthetic, it's a completely different experience than I've only had that once in my life, and it was quite a striking experience. The anesthesiast puts this cone on your head with the gas and says count to 10 backwards, and you go 10, 9, 8, 7, and then you open your eyes and you're in the recovery room. And maybe an hour, 2 hours, who knows how long has passed, but for you it's just an instant. But when you sleep, no matter how deeply you sleep, when you wake up, there's still some sense of time having passed. You don't have that sense of you close your eyes and then you open them the next instant. So there is still some consciousness in deep sleep. And I can talk about some practices relating to sleep. One that's very good, particularly when one is doing extended meditation, is to meditate into the sleep states. And the way this is done is to make a firm resolution in your mind when you lie down that you're going to try to catch the last breath falling asleep and the first breath waking up. And then meditate on the breath as you drift off to sleep. And this is kind of a subtle balance. You don't want to strive too hard with the meditation, because at this point you want to allow yourself to sleep. It's not like when you're meditating you're fighting off sleep. You want to sleep. So you just sort of let yourself drift, but you just try and keep aware of the breath as much as possible. And it's very interesting. It may take some repeated tries, And most people will get the first breath waking up easier. And that itself is quite interesting. You have a sense of waking up instantly, not like slowly pulling yourself out and gradually emerging from the murk, but just bang, throwing a light switch. You're awake, you're on, you know where you are, what you're doing, your day's begun. But it's really interesting if you can catch the last breath falling asleep, because there's a sense of transiting directly from the waking state into the dream state. And you're immediately into a lucid dream. And you might lose the lucidity fairly quickly. You might get lost, but there's a clarity for at least for a moment there. The Tibetan version of this practice is to work with the throat chakra, which is associated with dreaming, and to visualize the blue lotus, the 16-petal blue lotus at the throat, and hold that visualization as you go to sleep. Another way of inducing lucid dreams that's quite effective is to make the practice during the day as you're walking around doing your chores, whatever, during the day, just 5 or 6 times during the day randomly. Ask yourself very seriously, at this moment, am I sleeping or waking? And just take, a few seconds to really contemplate that. Is this sleep or wake? And you establish that habit. And then after a few days in your dream, you'll ask yourself, am I sleeping or waking? And the first time it happens, you may be confused, and you might think, oh, I'm waking, when you're actually sleeping. And, then it doesn't do anything. But if you notice, oh, I'm sleeping, and if that doesn't alarm you so much that you immediately wake up, which it might do the first time or the first couple of times, if you can say, oh, I'm sleeping, and you're sleeping, or I know I'm dreaming, I should say more precisely, then you're immediately into a lucid dream. So there's that, which is a way of extending consciousness into the dream state. I have heard it said that some yogis can maintain a consciousness in the deep sleep, an awareness, but I can't vouch for that, and I have a hard time seeing theoretically how that would work, but that is claimed by some. So there's all these variations, things you can do with that time that you spend sleeping. And it's not in itself wasted time. It's necessary for our bodies, our organisms, and our minds. We cycle in and out of that state. We have those 3 states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are 3 states of consciousness quite different from each other that everybody experiences every day. And we have the potential for other states of consciousness, such as jhana, that are kind of higher states or deeper states. And it seems like all the higher animals do experience some manner of sleeping and dreaming. One interesting variation that I read about is dolphins, and probably all sea mammals like that, the higher mammals of the sea. They've got a form of sleep in which only one hemisphere of the brain sleeps at a time. So they always have some alertness in case of sharks or something. But they'll sleep like their right hemisphere for a while, then switch and sleep their left hemisphere. So I think I'll wrap it up and wish you all a good night and happy dreams tonight.